The global financial system is shifting, and most people aren't paying attention. Right now, a coalition of nations representing nearly half the world's population is actively working to reduce dependence on the US dollar. Central banks are loading up on gold. Oil is being sold for currencies other than the dollar. And a series of summits, declarations, and bilateral agreements are quietly redrawing the financial map of the world. Today, we're breaking down exactly what's happening with BRICS, the US dollar, and what all of it means for your money. Not with fear, not with hype, but with verified facts and honest analysis. By the end of this video, you'll understand the real story behind the headlines. What's actually changing, what's still speculative, and what steps make sense for everyday people in a world undergoing a slow but significant financial transformation. Let's get into it. To understand what's happening in global finance, you first need to understand BRICS. The name itself is an acronym that originally stood for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. 5 large emerging economies that began coordinating as a bloc in 2009. But BRICS today looks very different from its origins. In October 2024, the bloc held its latest summit in Kazan, Russia, and the scale of what this organization has become is genuinely remarkable. BRICS now includes 11 member nations, with the expanded membership bringing in countries like Iran, Egypt, Ethiopia, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia. When you add up the populations of all current member states, you're looking at somewhere between 40 and 46% of the entire world's population. That is not a fringe group. That is nearly half of humanity operating under a shared economic framework. And the growth doesn't stop there. More than 40 nations have formally expressed interest in joining or partnering with BRICS in some capacity. This includes countries across Southeast Asia, Latin America, Africa, and the Middle East. The reasons these nations are drawn to BRICS vary. Some want access to development financing outside of Western institutions. Others are frustrated with what they see as the political conditions attached to IMF or World Bank lending, and others are simply hedging against dollar dependency. Trade within the BRICS bloc has been growing steadily, and as membership expands, that internal economic weight only increases. The point here is not that BRICS is about to replace the existing global order tomorrow. It's that this coalition is now too large, too economically significant, and too strategically motivated to be dismissed. Whatever happens next in global finance, BRICS will be a central part of that story. To appreciate why what's happening now is significant, you need to understand how the US dollar got to where it is. The story begins at Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, in 1944. With World War II winding down and much of the global economy in ruins, representatives from 44 allied nations gathered to design a new international monetary system. The agreement they reached established the US dollar as the world's reserve currency, the anchor of global trade and finance. Under the Bretton Woods system, the dollar was pegged to gold at $35 per ounce, and all other currencies were pegged to the dollar. This gave the United States an extraordinary privilege, the ability to issue the currency that the entire world needed to do business. The practical consequences of this arrangement are profound, and they affect ordinary people even if they never think about it. When the dollar is the global reserve currency, there is always international demand for dollars, meaning the US can run trade deficits, borrow cheaply, and finance its government spending in ways that no other country can. It's sometimes called an exorbitant privilege, and that phrase captures something real. The dollar's dominance was further cemented in the 1970s through the petrodollar system. After Nixon ended the dollar's gold convertibility in 1971, the U.S. negotiated agreements with Saudi Arabia and other OPEC nations to price oil exclusively in dollars. Since every country in the world needs oil, and oil is priced in dollars, every country in the world needs to hold dollars. This created a permanent, structural global demand for the U.S. currency that had nothing to do with gold and everything to do with energy. The financial and geopolitical power this gave the United States was, and remains, enormous. One of the most powerful tools this system gave the U.S. is control over SWIFT, the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication, the messaging network that connects banks globally for international transactions. Because so much of global trade is settled in dollars and flows through SWIFT, the United States can effectively cut countries off from the global financial system as a form of sanctions. This has been used against Russia following the 2022 invasion of Ukraine and against Iran in the context of its nuclear program. For countries that don't align with U.S. foreign policy, these tools represent a genuine vulnerability, and that vulnerability is one of the key drivers behind the push for alternatives. The dollar's dominance is real, but it is not without its fracture lines. These are not conspiracy theories. They are documented economic trends that financial institutions and governments around the world are actively responding to. Start with the numbers. China, once the largest foreign holder of U.S. Treasury bonds, has been steadily reducing those holdings. From a peak of around $1.3 trillion, Chinese holdings have declined to under $800 billion. That's a significant reduction, and it signals a deliberate policy of reducing exposure to U.S. debt. China is not alone in this trend. Several other central banks have similarly trimmed their treasury holdings over the past decade. Then there's the petrodollar itself, which is showing signs of erosion. Saudi Arabia, long a cornerstone of the petrodollar system, has begun accepting yuan, the Chinese currency, for oil sales to China. This is not a wholesale abandonment of the dollar, but it is a meaningful departure from the decades-long arrangement that has kept dollar demand structurally embedded in global energy markets. At the same time, central banks worldwide have been dramatically increasing their gold reserves. According to data from the World Gold Council, central bank gold purchases have been at historically high levels in recent years. Countries like China, India, Turkey, and Poland have all been consistent buyers. This is not random. It reflects a deliberate strategy of diversifying away from dollar-denominated assets. And then there's the structural issue with U.S. finances themselves. The United States has run persistent trade deficits for decades, meaning it imports significantly more than it exports. At the same time, the federal budget deficit, the gap between what the government spends and what it collects in taxes, has been growing, adding to a national debt that now exceeds $34 trillion. These numbers are not immediately catastrophic, and the dollar remains the world's dominant reserve currency by a considerable margin. But they do represent long-term vulnerabilities. Nations looking at these trends have reason to think about what happens if dollar stability weakens, and many of them are taking action now to reduce their exposure before any potential crisis. This is where honest analysis becomes especially important, because the Kazan summit generated a lot of breathless coverage that mixed genuine developments with significant exaggeration. So let's be precise about what actually happened. The Kazan Declaration, which was the official document released at the conclusion of the October 2024 summit, addressed the topic of cross-border payment systems and financial cooperation. The language in the declaration reflects a serious discussion about reducing dependence on the dollar and developing alternative payment infrastructure. But it is careful, measured language that acknowledges these are goals and frameworks under discussion, not systems already built and operational. What the declaration does is welcome the ongoing work on alternative payment mechanisms, support the development of BRICS cross-border payments initiative, and call for further study and cooperation among member states. What it does not do is announce the launch of a new BRICS currency, unveil a gold-backed alternative to the dollar, or declare any concrete operational system ready for deployment. The distinction matters. There is a real and serious conversation happening within BRICS about building alternatives to dollar-dominated financial infrastructure. That conversation is progressing. But we are at the stage of frameworks, working groups, and pilot programs, not a finished system ready to challenge the dollar's global role. Anyone claiming the BRICS currency has arrived or is imminent is not reading the actual documents. What is more operationally advanced is the expansion of bilateral trade in local currencies between BRICS members. Russia and China, for example, now conduct a significant portion of their bilateral trade in rubles and yuan rather than dollars. India has been experimenting with rupee-denominated trade with certain partners. These are real, measurable changes, not theoretical. They represent the early stages of a financial architecture that, over time, could meaningfully reduce global dollar dependency even without a formal new currency. The honest assessment is this. BRICS is building something real, but it is in early construction. The foundation is being laid, not the roof. In a financial environment where central banks are diversifying away from pure dollar reserves, precious metals become an interesting part of the conversation. Gold has been the most visible beneficiary of this trend. Central bank gold purchases have been running at historically elevated levels, and that institutional demand is one genuine factor supporting gold prices. But the motivations go beyond just investment returns. For central banks, gold has a specific appeal. It is an asset that carries no counterparty risk. U.S. Treasuries are a claim on the U.S. government. Dollars held as reserves can be frozen or sanctioned. Gold is gold. It cannot be devalued by another country's monetary policy or made inaccessible through financial system controls. For nations that experienced the Russia sanctions as a warning about dollar vulnerability, this distinction carries real weight. Silver occupies a different but related position. Unlike gold, which is primarily a monetary and store of value asset, silver has substantial and growing industrial demand. Solar panels require significant amounts of silver in their photovoltaic cells. Electric vehicles use silver in their electronics and battery management systems. The broader electronics industry, from smartphones to medical devices, relies on silver for its unmatched electrical conductivity. As the global energy transition accelerates, silver demand from industrial applications has been rising. This creates a different kind of investment thesis than gold, one grounded in physical industrial necessity rather than monetary preference. Whether silver prices reflect this potential adequately is a separate debate, but the underlying demand dynamics are real and documented. Historically, precious metals have served as stores of value and monetary anchors across virtually every civilization that has used money. The 20th century saw an unprecedented experiment in pure fiat currency, money backed by nothing except government debt. Create an institutional trust. That experiment has been mostly successful, but it has also produced inflation, currency crises, and the kind of structural imbalances we described earlier. The renewed interest in gold among central banks may reflect a growing institutional awareness that pure fiat systems have limits. A balanced view is this: precious metals are not a magic solution. They do not generate income, and they can be volatile. But they do serve a genuine role in diversification. And in a world where currency values are increasingly subject to geopolitical maneuvering, that diversification rationale is more compelling than it was a generation ago. You might be wondering what any of this has to do with your life, your savings, or your financial decisions. The connection is real, even if it operates at a scale that can feel abstract. The dollar's reserve currency status directly affects your purchasing power. When the world demands dollars, it supports the dollar's value, which means your dollars buy more. If that global demand weakens significantly over time, the cost of imported goods could rise, your savings could lose purchasing power, and the federal government's ability to borrow cheaply to finance services and benefits could be constrained. These are not immediate threats, but they are genuine long-term considerations that prudent financial planning should account for. The key word in all of this is gradual. Big financial shifts don't happen overnight. The British pound's decline from global reserve currency to secondary status took decades. The dollar's position, if it weakens, will likely do so slowly, giving people and institutions time to adapt. The smart response to this reality is not panic. It's not converting your entire savings into gold coins and hiding them under your mattress. It's awareness and thoughtful, incremental diversification. A portfolio that includes some exposure to assets that perform well when dollar confidence weakens, whether that's precious metals, international assets, inflation-protected securities, or commodities, is simply a more resilient portfolio than one entirely concentrated in dollar-denominated instruments. Staying informed matters more than acting on fear. The financial media ecosystem is full of incentives to exaggerate and alarm, because fear drives clicks, and clicks drive revenue. The same is true of precious metals marketing, which often uses genuinely real concerns about dollar stability to push people toward purchases that may or may not be appropriate for their individual situation. The real takeaway from everything we've covered today is not that the dollar is collapsing, or that BRICS has already replaced the existing financial order. It's that the global financial system is in a period of genuine, documented transition, and that being aware of that transition and thinking carefully about how it might affect your financial life is simply good sense. Talk to a qualified financial advisor before making any significant changes to your investment strategy. What makes sense for one person's financial situation may not make sense for another's. But the conversation is worth having, and now you have the informed foundation to have it. Here's what we know for certain. BRICS is real, it's growing, and the global financial landscape is changing. The dollar faces genuine long-term challenges. Central banks are diversifying. Trade relationships are shifting. None of this is conspiracy. It's documented reality that you can verify in official declarations, central bank data, and financial reporting from institutions around the world. The Kazan summit confirmed that the world's largest emerging economies are serious about building alternatives to dollar-dominated financial infrastructure, even if those alternatives are still in early development. The cracks in the petrodollar system are visible and widening. The accumulation of gold by central banks is accelerating, and the nations that once had little choice but to operate inside a dollar-centric system are now investing in the infrastructure to have other options. Big financial shifts don't happen overnight. They happen gradually, then suddenly. The British pound's fall, the collapse of Bretton Woods, the Asian financial crisis, the 2008 meltdown. In each case, the underlying pressures built slowly before breaking through in ways that surprised people who weren't watching. The smart move is awareness and preparation, not panic. Understand the forces shaping the world economy. Diversify thoughtfully. Stay grounded in verified facts rather than hype or fear. And keep asking the questions that mainstream financial media often won't ask. That's how you protect your financial future in a world that's genuinely changing. Not by reacting to every alarming headline, but by building a clear, fact-based picture of where the world is actually heading. If this video gave you clarity over confusion, hit the like button, subscribe for more, and drop a comment below. What surprised you most?